Now, a project such as this would not have been possible without the collaborative efforts of many. The support of WIPO, Alcatel-Lucent, booz&co, and CII have been mentioned already, and I thank them once again. I would also like to thank two of my close collaborators, Daniela, on the podium here with me, and Shasha Vush-Vincent from WIPO. I think we have formed a great team, and thank you very much, Shasha. I don't know where you are. Thank you, Shasha, and thank you, Daniela, for your support. Now, innovation is a theme that is certainly very close to our hearts, and I'd like to just preface the presentation by mentioning clearly what are we trying to measure out here. So the Global Innovation Index, at the end of the day, of course, produces a certain number to measure something related to innovation capacity and innovation performance of an economy. But the two elements are very important. We are trying to measure both the innovation capacity, the capability of an economy to innovate, and also the actual innovation performance that exists for an economy. And we fully realize that there might be investments made in innovation capability today that might take some time to show up in actual innovation performance. But this focus on both inputs and outputs is an important part of what we are trying to capture. The second point I'd like to mention at the outset is what is the definition of innovation? Now, when many of us probably went to our graduate programs in universities, the definition was fairly limited for innovation. It was seen often as innovation in new products or new services, and the research being done by a group of scientists or technical specialists inside a research lab of a private enterprise or a governmental organization. And the indicators being used to measure that were classically linked to science and technology indicators typically. The number of scientists, the number of patents, the number of publications, and so on. Now, these indicators still are relevant, still are very important, but what we have seen is innovation has broadened as a theme. Today, innovation is happening in many different spaces, in marketing models, in business models, in pricing models, in even societal models. So we are seeing innovation becoming much more broad as a phenomena, and that brings us the challenge of how do you measure innovations in the broader phenomena. And when you see the innovation index model, we are trying to capture some of this broad-based view of innovation. So please keep that view as you look at this innovation index presentation. I will pass over to Daniela just to outline some specific technical aspects of the presentation of the research we have done, and then I will pick up the presentation and go through some key results.
Good morning. So I'll just provide a short insight on the technical details behind the Global Innovation Index. This index covers 141 countries' economies, which all have their profiles in Appendix 1. We cover 84 indicators, all detailed in Appendix 2, and we have made a huge effort to include as much hard data as possible. So we have a global coverage and a very broad scope. There is an effort to capture innovation in emerging markets through proper scaling of indicators, taking into account the stages in development of countries. We include indicators on knowledge diffusion, the traditional indicators such as knowledge, royalty receipts, high-tech exports, FDI outflows, but also knowledge absorption, high-tech imports, royalty payments, FDI inflows. We detail this time for the very first time this year the strengths and weaknesses of each country in the country profiles. For the very first time as well, we have comparability, year-on-year comparability of results. For the second time, we have an audit of the index that was performed by the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. It's therefore independent, and we provide confidence intervals for the rankings. And we have proper sources and definitions for the 84 indicators that we include, technical notes very clearly defined as well, and details on the adjustments made to the framework and the reasons for the adjustments made to the framework. And you'll see in a second why this is key. For timeliness, first, we have 91% of data which is from 2009 or later. We include new data that we think is relevant these days. For example, from the International Standard Organization, we managed to get data that had never been shared before by Google on video uploads on YouTube for the creative outputs pillar, and so on. One last insight on year-on-year comparability. This year, we are expanding the country coverage by 16 economies, which is a lot, and which has a strong impact on the rankings, particularly for the countries at the bottom of the ranking. So we made an effort to distinguish the impact of those added countries, 16, the impact of the changes in the framework, the new indicators, in those that went out, and so on, and distinguish those impacts from the impact of relative performance on the basis of last year's model. And I say relative because a ranking is always about relative performance. Even if indicators show absolute levels of performance, the rankings always reflect relative performances, and we really made an effort to present the differences in changes in rankings on that basis.
Thank you, Daniela. So what you have in front of you is the framework we use for trying to analyze both the capacity of an economy to innovate and the actual innovation results. So on the left-hand side, you have 5 input pillars that capture the capability of an economy to innovate. Those input pillars are institutions, human capital and research, infrastructure, market sophistication, and business sophistication. Each of them further subdivided into sub-elements, as you can read on the screen. We also have 2 output pillars which capture some of the actual outputs of innovation. There we have the technology and the knowledge outputs, and we have, very important, the creative outputs, which is a new element to the discussion of innovation today globally. As Daniela said, we do try to evolve the framework incrementally every year, and this year we have made 2 important incremental evolutions. The first evolution is in the infrastructure pillar. You will see at the bottom a sub-pillar, a sub-component on ecological sustainability. So we do believe sustainability is an important theme, important element of building a sustainable capability for innovation in an economy. So we have tried to highlight that element in the framework more explicitly. Also, you will see in the last pillar of creative outputs, at the bottom, there is a new sub-component on online creativity. So we all know that there's a lot of creativity happening online today in different formats, in different forms by individuals and businesses and other organizations. And we are trying to capture some of this online creativity also in the framework. Now, if you look at the results of this year, a very simple summary of the results are shown on the slide. So you can think of different kinds of rankings. So the first one is a ranking on the input indicators, the input capability. So that is a simple average of the 5 input pillars. The next one is a simple average of the 2 output pillars. So the 2 output dimensions of actual innovation performance. And then as two overall measures, we have two indicators. One is the efficiency ratio, which is output divided by input, which is a measure of how efficiently is an economy transforming its input capability into innovation outputs. And the overall measure that we quote is the Global Innovation Index, which is a simple average of the input and output sub-indexes. Now you will see that the overall average, which is the last column out here on the screen, of Global Innovation Index, gives an overall holistic score of an economy's capability to innovate and also the actual innovation performance. And there you see a mix of economies, mainly high-income economies, but from across the world, Europe, Asia, and North America. What is more interesting is, of course, the efficiency ratio, where you see perhaps a different set of countries, a mix of both high income countries, and also low income economies or middle income economies. And that represents a different kind of measurement, a capability of how efficiently is a country transforming inputs into outputs at different levels of income. Now, in terms of key results, I'll go through them very quickly. I'd like to encourage you to read through the report in detail. There are lots of very interesting data elements out there. Specifically, also we have detailed country profiles. Now, one overall result we see is in the world today, we see still a strong innovation divide. People talk about digital divides and other divides. We do see an innovation divide in which the high-income economies do tend to dominate along the different elements of the innovation index model. Now, if you look at a geographical basis, you see there is again a clear trend in which Northern America tends to have the overall highest scores on the Global Innovation Index, followed by Europe, followed by Southeast Asia and Oceania, followed by Northern Africa and Western Asia, followed by Latin America and Caribbean, followed by Central Southern Asia, and finally Sub-Saharan Africa. Of course, you can take a different geographical split of these different economies, but it gives you a sense of how this different innovation performance is spread on a geographical basis. Now, the second result is also interesting, is if you plot the various countries and the performance on the index based on the income per capita, GDP per capita, you see an interesting trend line out there. So you see some economies who are performing extremely well. For the same GDP per capita, they're performing at a much higher level. Some that are performing perhaps at higher levels, but at lower GDP per capita levels, and some that are performing below the trend line. Now, if you look at some of these more detailed countries, we have details of where each country is positioned. It might take you some time to find your country of interest in this slide, which is a little crowded. But at the same time, what we do see is a trend that you see across different income groups, countries that are doing better than the trend line, countries that are doing approximately at the same trend line, and countries that are perhaps performing at a slightly lower level below the trend line. So here you see the countries with a red dot at different income levels are performing above the trend line. So for the same GDP per capita levels, they are in fact doing better as compared to other countries at the similar income levels or GDP levels. The countries with the middle set of lightly colored bluish black dots, they are performing close to the trend line. Again, at different income levels, they are performing close to the trend line, what you'd expect at that GDP per capita levels. And countries at the lower, more darker shaded bullet points, they are performing at levels which are in relative terms lower than the trend line. So again, it gives you a sense of where different countries are positioned, And one can, of course, use this data points as sources for learning, for benchmarking, and trying to see not just how you compare with other comparable or other interesting countries, but also how can you learn from them and improve for the future. Now, another important result is looking at the investments that companies and countries are making in innovation. And here we see some interesting trends. There are countries and economies that have increased the innovation spending in the last few years since the crisis. There are countries that have managed to maintain the innovation spending, and many others have decreased the innovation spending. And what we would like to point out here is that based on our research, we do believe that a continued commitment to investing in innovation is very important. Because if you slow down or stop innovation spending in times of crisis or in times when you're challenged fiscally, it may take you much longer to recover that momentum once the economy improves or once that crisis sort of becomes less accentuated for the economies in question. So it's very important to keep that commitment to innovation going forward from our results. What we also see is, and this was highlighted in the introductory comments, the linkages across innovation actors are very important. Because today we all know that there are multiple actors who influence the innovation culture, the innovation results in an economy. And just focusing on any one actor by themselves or by itself doesn't necessarily enable an economy to make the desired progress. So one has to act and seek the support of multiple actors. One has to build the linkages across them. And that's one reason why today in the report we also have a number of very important chapters that go into some of the qualitative aspects of how to build the linkages. Many of the chapters have been contributed by our knowledge partners, many by our esteemed advisory board members, and from other experts around the world. And sometimes they also focus on regional phenomena, regional expertise that you see in specific parts of the world. So we need to understand some of the linkages much better and try to see how can each economy, for its own stage of development, for its own unique history and culture, build more and stronger linkages across the innovation actors. Another result which is interesting in the context of being in Europe is that you do see a pattern of a multi-speed Europe. Now here you have a in-depth, let's say, blow up of the European countries on the previous graph that you saw. And here you see that some economies, especially in Northern Europe, are doing, in relative terms, better than others in Southern Europe. But what is also interesting is you see some economies in Eastern Europe, like Czech Republic, like Hungary, like Latvia, like Estonia, who are coming up and moving rapidly up the innovation performance. So in some sense, there is a picture that is a complex one in Europe. There are leaders, there are rapid movers and learners, and there are also economies that can perhaps do better. Now, if you look at Northern America, you of course have the US in a very strong position at number 10. But it's also interesting to note that the US used to be slightly higher up in the previous rankings. Now, what we have done this year is try to compare over 10 years the trend lines in some indicators which we consider as being important for America as compared to other leading innovators. Here we represent some of them, and you will see that the US performance in some cases is comparable to other leaders, in some cases better, but in some other cases it actually is a little bit lower. And even more worrying, sometimes the trend lines are perhaps not in the right direction. So it shows that there are some weakness in some of these economies despite great strengths. And there's some attention perhaps that could be focused on some of these weaknesses in order to preserve the strong position that America has in global innovation. Now, if you look at the BRIC economies and you compare them to the top 10 on the Global Innovation Index, you see an interesting pattern. So the solid red line out here represents the top 10 on the Global Innovation Index as a whole. And then you have Brazil, China, India, and Russia represented by various dotted and solid lines of different colors. Now you see that there is a slight interesting pattern developing. You see that China on knowledge and technology outputs comes very close and in fact even exceeds the average of the top 10 innovators. And this is interesting development, showing that even middle-income economies or emerging economies can achieve high results in specific areas of innovation outputs. If you look at further details and you look at these, as we mentioned, there are 7 pillars, 5 input and 2 outputs. Each pillar has 3 sub-components, so there are 21 sub-components in total. And you take a division of the 7 on which there's the closest, the least variation across the BRIC countries, and the 7 on which you have the highest variation across the BRIC countries. So you see again interesting patterns. And if you look at your picture on the right, where you see the 7 subcomponents on which there's the highest variation amongst the BRIC countries, you see, of course, China doing very well on knowledge creation, 6.1, but you also see India doing very well on creative intangibles, which is 7.1. So you see some interesting trends developing, and of course, you can go further in depth to understand some of these phenomena better. On the whole, what we see is the BRIC countries need to continue the investments in innovation inside various aspects of the economies, and certainly we do believe that there is more work to be done despite the progress they have made so far in further improving the innovation potential, innovation performance. The last result really out here is around this entire exercise as a whole. Measuring innovation, as I said at the start, is not an easy topic today because the definition of innovation has become much broader. So we do believe that the Global Innovation Index is an important step in that direction. We do expect that the model will keep evolving as our knowledge improves, as the data collection in areas of innovation measurement improve. And we do hope that you will join us in this journey. Your feedback, your application of some of these ideas to your own context is very important. And we do see this as a continuous process in which all of us learn together about how to best measure innovation performance, how to better measure innovation capabilities, because ultimately we need data to make more evidence-based policies. And ultimate goal of exercise like this is to help policymakers make better decisions in their own national context. Thank you very much.